Welcome to SUP, the Super Urban Podcast, a discussion on cities coming from RMIT Architecture and Urban Design in Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. I'm Ian Nazareth.
I'm Graham Christ.
And I'm Christine Phillips.
Saigon, or Ho Chi Minh City, is a metropolis of intense fascination for many of us. A city of close to 10 million, which has experienced explosive growth in the 21st century after coming out of an incredibly turbulent 20th century. It was under French colonial occupation as Indo China until 1954 and, of course, reunited with North Vietnam in 1975 when it was almost instantly renamed Ho Chi Minh City. It is now a metropolis with a famously intense street life, incredibly fine-grained density, and is an increasingly favoured international tourist destination, as well as an attractor of foreign business investment. It continues to undergo rapid transformation with a new underground metro line recently completed, plans for a new airport, a new seaport, and several more metro lines. This city was one of our main characters in the book Supertight, which I did with John Doyle, and we were fascinated with the intimacy and real looseness of its urban environment. So we're joined today by two guests, Ho Chi Minh City locals who are currently in Melbourne, one residing and one visiting, and of course our regular team of Christine, Ian and myself in the studio.
Tu Truong is an architect and urban designer trained at the University of Architecture in Ho Chi Minh City and has spent time working at the Ho Chi Minh City Department of Urban Planning and Architecture. She is currently researching the wet markets of Vietnam, in particular Ho Chi Minh City, and is currently visiting Australia for the first time as part of that research. Triet is an architect and director of the Vietnam-based practice 6A. He grew up in Saigon and did his architectural education in Oregon. He now resides in Melbourne while he carries out PhD study and builds works in his home city. Triet has even worked as a delivery driver, an experience he has described as giving him a very extensive experience of the city. Welcome to you both. And two, you've just returned from Broken Hill, among other places in Australia. A discussion for another time, perhaps.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us today. I wanted to commence our conversation with a general question about your experience of the city, growing up there, daily life for you, and your sense of the idea of the city. Can you give us your own personal experience living and working in Saigon? And perhaps, too, we should start with you.
Thank you very much for having me here today. So, I was born in Ho Chi Minh City. My original hometown is in the Mekong Delta. So I always consider myself as the child of the generation that migrated to Ho Chi Minh City, which comprising the large part of the population of Ho Chi Minh City nowadays. So to me, Ho Chi Minh City is friendly city. It's welcome mostly everyone and providing opportunities for mostly everyone. And I like traveling. And I've been traveling here and there across Vietnam. So it seems to me that in Ho Chi Minh City, it reminds me of mostly everywhere because it's comprised of the people coming from everywhere. However, still it has its very own identity. So there's always room for spatial and cultural characteristics to exhibit in the city, and maybe that kind of accumulation of cultural process that has made the city becoming more unique than ever. So it's also a part of the reason why I want to do research about the wet market. So to me, I feel like even though they appear to be somewhat messy and problematic, but yet the intricate manifestation of the local communities there make me think more about the opportunity and the cultural values that is there in Ho Chi Minh City. Yeah.
And what about you, Treat?
Well, it's actually interesting that Tu is doing research on the wet market, and perhaps I can kind of describe my upbringing as it revolves around the wet market as well. So when I was little, around 3 or 5, before kindergarten, I usually go with my grandma to the wet market. And it is not just a wet market, but pretty much an extension of a kindergarten, where my grandma would send me to. Pretty much everyone know my grandma first of all, and then she sent me to either 3 stores that's selling food. One is rice paper, which is called bánh ướt. The other one is bánh bèo, is sort of like another rice paper but different kind, or cơm tấm, which is broken rice. And we go to the market every other day, and they would fight over on which one would keep me for the day, while having my grandma going on with her daily life. Getting vegetables and everything. So in a way, the city to me is an extension. I think I would also speak to for many other one as well, as an extension of a living room, and most importantly, a snack board cupboard.
A snack cupboard.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that extension of living room. And I have to say, I went to Vietnam for the first time last year. And Graham, you mentioned the looseness of the urban environment. It was something that really stood out to me as soon as I got there, along with, as you mentioned, is the friendliness of everyone. And also Triet, you mentioned the markets, and I think there's something that connects all of those things together, this idea of the market culture, the friendliness of the people, but the looseness of the urban environment, which just makes Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon this sort of buzzing, wonderful, delightful place that I hadn't experienced before. I mean, how would you explain that relationship between those, the extension of the living room and the friendliness of the people that brings all of those things together?
Well, I guess sort of to expand the notions of the living room a little bit further. So as a kid, we used the street as it's not just a street so that car and bicycle and bike can move about for transportation, but we use them to as game as well. There's so many sort of game, football, traditional game, things that which is kind of like come up in our head, and playing hide and seeks and those sort of thing. And it's pretty much happen any time of the day. In the morning, we come over like, hey, you want to go play game? Or later in the day, afternoon, when it's like less hot, and then let's go play football. So we constantly use the street as a source of entertainment, and it's just naturally in our blood that way.
2 words that I heard from you, True, messy and intricate, which are really nice ways to describe it. And I think particularly the word messy is so rich in relation to this, because there's such a common perception amongst Westerners that the city is really chaotic and disorganised, and yet there's all this evidence that it's really, really finely tuned and very sophisticated kind of set of urban layers.
Yeah, I think the notion of we usually associated the market nowadays in Ho Chi Minh City as somewhat like messy and problematic, maybe. But I think like that is a kind of terminology that need to be rethink about. And for me, those guys it's more associated with like the emergence of multiple personalities and characteristics coming from the large the communities in the local market over there. So yeah, to me it's like something that I perceived about the local community in the market. So it seems to me that in Ho Chi Minh City there's always rooms for those kind of like very like different personality to exhibit it around. So somewhat it comprise the kind of like characteristic, the unique of the city, which is comprised by like the personality of its own population. Yeah, so yeah.
In terms of that personality, another I think perception as outsiders, this discussion about friendliness and familiarity. So at a market, it's not surprising that the cute little kid like Triet is sort of warmly embraced by all the market owners, but it does seem to. It feels like a culture of real openness to foreigners as well, and a openness to absorb new influences and take on outside stuff, compared with other cultures, in my experience.
I mean, mine too, absolutely a welcomeness and very also multicultural as well. I'm curious I think one thing that I'm interested in is understanding how that condition of the looseness, the living room as the public space, the sort of fluidity between all these conditions, which are wonderfully messy, and there does seem to be a sort of more fine-grained relationship between all those things. Yet Saigon is now, it's a very contemporary city. It's very built up. And I wondered too, as an urban designer, whether you had any reflections on how that wonderful messiness is still maintained within this very contemporary city. And speaking as an Australian, where on the street, you have to apply for a permit to do anything, whether it's on the street. You can't just sort of set up a shop, and you can't, it's a very different idea of public space, and the street is completely different in Ho Chi Minh. And I wondered whether you think that character of the city, how is that being maintained given the complexities of building a very contemporary modern city? Is there any danger that beautiful state of what seems to be messy but isn't declining?
Well, thanks for your question. That's an interesting question. So I had a great experience during doing my research about the market. So during the process, I was curious, and I tried to list all of the public market in Ho Chi Minh City. So even though officially on the list there are approximately 200 formal markets, however, beside that, I was surprised that there are another approximately 200. I usually say that informal markets, or we can call it like a pop-up flea market in the terminology, in the modern terminology. So that has been established. Those markets, they were established by the local community, and it works very effectively in supporting the daily life of the citizen. So it makes me rethink a lot about the mechanism in which the existing urban fabric is comprised, and thus evolves through time. So in general, so that means every 500 meter or 1 kilometer distance, there is a market in Ho Chi Minh City. And compared to the current Barcelona plan, where they are trying to provide market for every 1 kilometer distance. So I believe that in that way, I think that the local community has established a very effective market network. So, however, on the downside, not really the downside, but from the current urban development perspective. So I think that the marketplace, this is a public space, and is considered, and in light of the current condition of Ho Chi Minh City, where there's a lot of urban development that need to be established in the city. So then, therefore, the market becoming kind of a vulnerable space where it need to have something. There needs to be a lot of thought in the current operation and function of the market, and situate that in the existing existing network of the urban area in Ho Chi Minh City, in order to see whether or not it can support or facilitate the ongoing process, urban process in the city. So in that way, that means that the market and the so in that way, that means that there's a kind of like it just suggests me that like there's a lot of like kind of like design innovation that needed to be put into this kind of situation where the marketplace is facing a kind of a lot of demand for changing. But however, we don't really know like in which way that it could be changed, and also like in which way that it's facing the kind of like constraint and like limited condition and the scarcity condition of the urban resource in Ho Chi Minh City.
I mean, it's a really sort of fascinating sort of discussion, and I think I sort of, being the one in the group here that hasn't been to Ho Chi Minh City, it's really interesting for me to kind of interact with the sort of discussion and the experience, from talking to other people about the city. But I think also this the language of formal and informal that's used to describe the city, I mean, also resonates with my sort of background growing up in Mumbai, and thinking about a similar kind of the binary that's set up between this idea that there can be two kinds of networks or two kinds of cities that coexist, and it's almost it's almost like a challenge to kind of deal with those two paradigms at the same time, and there's always like competing moments where they kind of butt heads. And when you were describing the street earlier on, I was also thinking about I think it might be Louis Kahn, a quote from Louis Kahn where he describes the street as a room by agreement, which is sort of a really fascinating idea, thinking about like how, especially in your descriptions of Ho Chi Minh City, and of just how contested that space is, and that you do need some kind of a very particular language, or to kind of be able to negotiate those complexities. And I was curious about like your further thoughts on how is that evolving, given the pressures of more density, perhaps. I know there's a discussion about changing grain of the city because of vehicles like or SUVs coming to the city, as opposed to being largely about bicycles and motorbikes. And how did those sort of parameters start to change that relationship people have with the street and the front and the shop houses? And
That's actually a very interesting and also difficult questions. And I think I don't know about Du, but I think it's something that we kind of have to adapt to the changing value in society, because I mean, as we develop and things start to change, and or either scale up or scale down, then it's something that we have to kind of like adapt, and which is actually one of sort of like the value that we have in society as a whole. Let's say, well, when you were talking about the urban fabric, that's kind of remind me of one of the research that I read from HTAP, Hoàn Trang and Archipelago, where their research was describing the street in Saigon, Dong Khởi. So on one side is a really high-end hotel, and on the other side of the street is pretty much like really small scale, small vendor where they are like selling newspaper, matchsticks, and those sort of things. So they kind of coexist on either side of the street. But then you can kind of see on the other side is on the hotel side, it's super nice, clean. Nobody is occupying the street. But on the other side, there are like people hanging out on the street, having a drink, having coffee, smoking and conversing with each other. And I find that's quite interesting with that sort of juxtapositions between activities, and that's one of the things that makes it interesting, because we can see there are constraints, but there are also potential on how we can keep this kind of fabric going as we develop. And another way is that, the scale of the street in Saigon, there's big, but there's also the alleyway where it's really small, and there's no other way that an SUV can actually enter. So in a way, the scale of the alleyway is also preserving the daily habit that we kind of have been developing and kind of have for such a really long time. And if you walk into the alleyway, you kind of see the activities change and evolve throughout the day, which is actually a really interesting to space to be in. Yeah.
Our music soundbreak you just heard comes from Vietnam's Run Cup Doi collective from the 2023 collection called One. That piece is titled Straws. It strikes me as an urban culture which is really not afraid of fast change, and it's kind of embraced it. But often, visitors like us will talk about it in quite nostalgic terms. I've heard a number of people from different big cities say, "Oh, this has the qualities of the city that my home used to be like, and it's sort of been designed out." So it's interesting when you talk about in relation to the various pressures that urban spaces are under, and yet there's been a willingness both to embrace change but also to maintain some of these really quite informal cultures.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't really have that sense of nostalgia because I don't feel like any city in Australia had that. And I feel like, Triet, you mentioned the word value, the values of people, and I feel like what really came out of my visit to Saigon was how the values of people in Saigon are so vastly different from in Australian cities, and I think it's to do with the valuing of people and community, whereas in Australia it seems to be driven by safety. And it really plays out so, like, it just gave me a very different perspective into urban environments that are connected with the values of people in that city as well. I'm interested to hear about your experience as a delivery person in Saigon and how that has now influenced your practice as an architect, Triet.
Well, perhaps I can start with my practice first. So one of the thing that I really enjoy in my practice is to go see site before they get built, because then it's kind of take me away from my daily routine and take me to places that I haven't been to before, and trying to understand what's the fabric of that site is like. So I guess from that sort of activities, then it's planted a seed in my head where I want to. I kind of just one day decided to become a Grab driver. So it's an equivalence of Uber driver here in Australia, but with a scooter or moped. And so I played that role for about 6 months, delivering packages and people. And pretty much throughout the entire day, I driven at least 100 kilometers a day across all these different kind of district. So seeing the vast changes, of scale from an alleyway where it's like just amazed. I can never get out if I don't ask the local, how do I get out of this place? To a really well-planned, grid-like area, gated community. So it's quite a good experience in understanding the social fabric of the city, how people live or adapt to the place where they live. If it's an alley, then they have to use the street as an extension of their living room and getting to know their neighborhood. But then when I go to a more gated area where a house is pretty much like 3 times bigger than a house in the alleyway, then I don't see people out in the street at all. I went to a place that's a house is like 20 by 20 meter, which is actually really big in comparing to a normal alleyway, which is a house which is about 4 by 15 or 13, even 3 by 10. And pretty much it's just a front yard and then a few cars. And I don't see kids playing out on the street. I don't see people, conversing with each other. So that's quite a great experience.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking that it's almost given you like access to a very different layer of information about a city that we wouldn't normally gauge or get if we're just visiting a site. And it's almost like you kind of you lock into the frequency or behavior of the city in a really different way and can observe really subtle changes. How has that part of the practice evolved or had to evolve by you sort of operating on a lot of projects while you're overseas?
That is very challenging because it took me out of daily routine where in my practice we like to go to site and when it's under constructions pretty much every single week, once or twice a week. And so by being outside of that like normal routine, then we kind of have to find a very different way to practice. And mostly we have to depend on our partnering contractor and communications. And that's so far is the only way that we can find it working.
Just to go back to the markets, I think it's probably worth discussing your research on the markets and your perspective, which we've so far talked about it from a quite personal, experiential perspective, but you're looking at this both as someone who has a local market that might visit regularly, but also someone who's been involved in the kind of strategic planning of the whole city. You've seen the metropolitan plans for Ho Chi Minh City. It's been constantly updating, and it seems like there's quite a fine-grained inventory and sort of planning policy for markets with different tiers of classification, etc., etc.
Yeah. So So as I mentioned, like the space for the market is part of the public space. So since it's the public space, so it's apart from accommodating the market, it's also playing a crucial role in the existing urban fabric of the city. So the nowadays attempt in trying to renovate the market and trying to like somehow rethink the role of that and the function of that and how it's operating has also placing the market in, the location for the market in the place where it also need to respond to a lot of like multiple goals and perspective, and in multiple perspective in the overall conversation of urban development. So so that means like so it places the market in the kind of situation where the changing of that, the spatial development for the market, it need to incorporate a lot of like ongoing demand for like such as like improving the urban infrastructure system, let's say, or how to deal with the street network, and also like how to place that in a kind of like heavy use of motorbike situation in the city, and also like since it's the public space, it is a kind of like arena for the population and also for the citizen to navigate around and conducting the daily activities, and those kind of things. They also, all of those need to be incorporated in the overall planning of the city. So that's why like even though the market, it has some kind of like value, and also like it, to me, it established a kind of like very intricate cultural values for the city. However, like it's also let's say like it's also play another role in the kind of like in the existing urban development requirement, let's say. So like placing, so that means it's placing the market in a kind of like really in need of like kind of design innovation or something like that to rethink the spatial for that. Yeah.
And you've described in the past how these spaces often have a quite informal edge. So there's the formal part of the market, but it will trigger a kind of a culture around its perimeter, both in the buildings opposite on the street, but also in the street itself, where there's kind of like the informal trading edge of the market.
Yeah, I think like that issue, like we can see it everywhere in the city, as I mentioned, because like apart from the area around the market, there's also all the informal market that established across the city. So to me, I relate it to the kind of rapid increasing of the population in the city in the past, like I think like a few decades, where a lot of immigration that coming to the city and seeking for future opportunities. So that's why like, so you can imagine that like the kind of like demand is increasing, but however the space for the market is still remain the same, and also the structure of the market, it received very less consideration in improving that. So somehow it's like it creating the increasing contradiction between the demand and the supply for the space in the market. However, like as I say that, I always feel that there's something like unique and characteristic about the market, Maybe because like it is where it is the place where people are freely to exhibit their own personality, and they, as you mentioned about the kind of like the agreement in the communities. So it's where that the community, they are conducting their very own behavior, they carry with their very own culture, and they make agreement with each other, negotiating the space and doing the daily operation of the daily trading. So that is the place where I think like there's a lot of opportunity for the manifestation of the local culture, that making the space become more unique. And that is the kind so that I always say that is a kind of like providing a room for the characteristic to emerge in the city.
It sounds like a incredibly subtle and maybe hard to plan thing. If you're a strategic planner or an urban designer, it's a kind of a difficult thing to protect or have the instrument to protect if you're interested in supporting it, or I guess conversely difficult to stamp out if you were not a fan of the market. It seems incredibly resilient and maybe resistant to urban planning.
Well, yeah. I think that in a way like it's very difficult to like observe and embrace. The thing that I've just described, it seems like it's very contradicted with each other, and it's very difficult to embrace both of that. But however, I think like so that's why I relate that to kind of like some sort of like that's why I look into the kind of like design. The space, the new space, some place where it related to the kind of like co-organizing or the mutual. Like the mutual operation of different activities in the city. So somehow it's also referred to me about the notion of the densification, where we are looking into the solution that can incorporate it, different activities, different kind of activities, different kind of program, different kind of function into the very like limited and footprint, and into the shared footprint and with a limited resource and capacity.
Triet, you've already sort of touched on your experience of establishing an architectural office in Vietnam and building projects both for developers and clients in Saigon. Could you tell us something about your experience of designing and making buildings, and how the city has been something that both informs your projects but also something that shapes around your projects?
Right. Well, since I am based in Saigon, then one of the value that I find it really important is that the architecture needs to follow climate. So Saigon is a tropical country. City. So pretty much everything and all of the computing component and the space need to respond to that. So it needs to be well ventilated, cross ventilation, staff installations, and employing all of the technique that we usually find in that region. And another value that is also important is to respond to all finding inspirations in everyday kind of activities, which is actually rooted in being resourcefulness, improvisations, and pretty much nothing goes to waste. And I find that very inspirational in looking at how people, let's say people in the market or in the alleyway, use the space and trying to understand why they are behaving the way that they do, and what sort of space look like, and extrapolate and embed it into our practice. So, for example, Since we were talking about the market a little bit, so the informal market, so it's a very fixated place. It has to be at one place, and at the place where in the area where I usually grow up, there would be either a lady or a guy that's on a tricycle, bringing the products from the market to our place. And we always associate with that person. Hey, can you bring a carrot tomorrow, and things like that. And there, so the mobility is extended outside of that place of the normal market. And then we also associate with identity of that person, and so in that way. It's informed a lot about the identity of the building that we create. It has to kind of have certain sense of tropicality, vernacular, things that make people feel like they're at home and not coming from somewhere else outside of the regions.
And what kind of buildings do you do in terms of programs? Is it mostly residential, or do you do public buildings, or?
Well, our building, we do a lot of residential, and then office. And pretty much recently, I mean in 2022, where we finished an office buildings, so it's called TBD. And that place is quite interesting because the client rents the land for 10 years. And then they build a building on top of it. So the building need to be have adaptability and then mobility, because when the contract ends in 10 years, then that building need to be moved. So we have to kind of respond to those sort of things in a very innovative way, in order to reduce waste, construction waste, and then addressing the whole life cycle of the building beyond the expected life expectancy of a building. And 10 years is not a really a long time. And even now, I mean, 5 years in, I think the building is sort of facing threat in being removed from that piece of land, because from the adjacent neighbor, they want to acquire the land where we are renting. I mean, not we, but the client are renting. And I mean, the next day it could be all uprooted and gone.
I mean, see, you spoke about I guess a sort of resourcefulness, in relation to, material use, but also a kind of attention to detail in how the building's being used and the kind of profile of the inhabitants of the building. Do you think that that's something very particular about how you practice in the city, or do a lot of those values come from the architectural community in the city itself?
I think both. It comes from the city because we understand that resources are very limited, so we have to be mindful and resourceful on the way how we use material and how we construct building in general. So it cannot be just a one-off thing, and then you build something up and then knock it down the next day, or a few. We've seen a lot of it happening as the city develop, and it's become pretty much an endless cycle. So that's on one hand. On the other hand, with our community of practice, we try. Because everyone is operating at a very small scales, 5 people or less, or even 10, less than 10. So they all each, from my observation, they pick out a really important topic to address that, and so together we build up a larger conversation around. Things like identity of the place, the building life expectancy, and beauty in every day life object, and just build up from that.
You mentioned the community. There's a number of really interesting young and small practices in your city and probably in Vietnam more generally. So maybe it's worth talking a bit about the design culture. So we recently curated an exhibition that was here at Melbourne Design Week called Practicing Vietnam, and we had 12 officers each exhibit a project, and they were all young and small officers. Also, experience of the city is you feel like you can walk into any cafe and there'll be a bunch of 22-year-olds editing video for some commercial enterprise. So maybe maybe we can talk about the drivers of that culture and the design scene more broadly. It seems like there's a really interesting generation of architects, but also there's a film industry and a sort of design industry which is feeding into some of the energy of the city.
Yes. Well, I think with the scenes coming up, then I think I have to kind of describe them as they are all engaging in an act of cultural making and redefining or reimagine what the Vietnamese culture is like. So there are not just in architecture, but outside of architecture, where they're looking at traditional games, stories, and how they can be reinterpreted differently and manifest differently through design. So that's also in gaming industry, in filming industry, in advertisement, in making objects like furniture, but reusing discarded things like TV and bicycle and those sort of things. So it's quite interesting. When we and going back to architecture, then which is my sort of view, then we've seen a lot of people readdressing urban farming, which is in the Practicing Vietnam. One of the project where the architect is a farmer turned architect, and he converted the entire house into a whole system, that aquaponic system that addresses the water cycle, growing food in the house and whatnot.
I didn't realize he was a farmer before an architect.
Yes, he was farmer, and there was another project where the architect used discarded bolt to clad the exterior of the house. So being resourceful and trying to transform things that go beyond their original intentions is something that pretty much everyone embraced due to the lack of resources or being resourceful in general.
Yeah, for me, through what I observe in the market, so I think that one of the many challenges both for the design community nowadays might be linked with the ongoing changing of the current urban process. So some houses require a kind of like for the design community to embrace the existing complex condition, and that kind of challenge, it will result in, it need to be resulted in some kind of like new solution in order to tackle with those kind of like situation in this very local area. So like I think that even though I see that there's a lot of challenges, but I also see that I think that there's also a lot of opportunity for new things to happen in Ho Chi Minh City.
It's a very optimistic and perhaps good way to wind up the conversation. So thank you very much to both of you, Tu and Triet, for joining us.
Thank you.
You're hearing us thanks to the generous support of the Alistair Swain Foundation and the RMIT University School of Architecture and Urban Design. We would like to acknowledge the people of the Bunwurrung and Woiwurrung language groups on whose unceded country we are recording this podcast, and extend that acknowledgement to all First Peoples of Australia who have been caring for the many layers of country for over 60,000 years.